Today's homily is for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. In the Gospel today from St. Luke, we hear Jesus teach us three things. We need to love God even more than we love our family. We need to be willing to carry our cross to follow Jesus. And we need to renounce our possessions to follow him. And Jesus, in explaining the seriousness of responding to his call to follow him, gives us the example of someone building a tower. The person sits down and carefully plans, can I accomplish what I am setting out to do? Or, like a king marching into battle, can I win the battle, or should I try to make peace instead? Choosing to follow Jesus needs to be as serious as that. And Jesus wants us to make a eyes wide open decision to follow him, not a decision where when difficulty comes, we say to ourselves, I did not know what I was getting into. Why does Jesus use the expression, one needs to hate one's family to be his disciple? I thought Jesus wanted us to love everyone. The Gospel of Matthew renders the same saying this way: whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up the cross to follow me is not worthy of me. Jesus is teaching that to choose to follow him takes a serious commitment on our part, and we should be clear-headed and think seriously about making that decision. Our strongest attachments in this world are towards our family, those who we love, and second, to our possessions, what we own. And this should not surprise us. And so Jesus takes these two very precious aspects in our lives and in the lives of all people and asks us to examine, do we love Jesus with the same care that we love our family members, our things, our possessions? Is Jesus sometimes third on the list, below family and possessions, of whom or what we love? Jesus is saying to be his follower, one must first love God. And Jesus centers his love of God on the cross. Jesus, of course, is not telling us to neglect our family duties, nor to use foolishly the earthly material resources that we have received. Rather, nothing can make a claim on us that takes the place of our relationship with the Lord. And Jesus confirmed the whole law as love of God and love of neighbor. But the ordering is important. God comes first, and the rest follows from the love that we have for God. And this is something that we live out in our lives day by day. The gospel today shows that to be a follower of Jesus takes a commitment and determination. It means being open to God's grace in our lives. It means making choices for good and sacrificing that which leads us away from Christ. And so Jesus gives us the example of taking up our cross and following him. Jesus embraced the cross. It was not something forced on him. For Jesus, the cross was to do the will of the Father, that all who believe in him might be saved. For Jesus to embrace the cross, he had to be detached from anything that would have stood in the way of doing God's will. And we see what kind of attachments those would be when we think of the temptations that the Lord faced in the desert. Make bread to relieve his own hunger. Jump off a high pinnacle to test God. Worship the devil, and then receive all the kingdoms of the world. Yet Jesus rejected the way offered by the devil and chose the way of the Father. He rejected what would have led to us not being redeemed. He chose the cross to fulfill the Father's will to destroy sin and restore man to a loving relationship with God. Jesus is teaching us to set our priorities in life. He's asking us to follow him and to take up our cross. And this brings us to the example of someone in our days who loved God even more than she loved her family. She left home to be a missionary, and she was willing to carry her cross to follow Jesus, and she renounced the possessions to follow him. In addition to entering into a new culture, perhaps the greatest cross in that period of time when one joined the missionary community was to leave home, and rarely did they go back home to visit family or to have vacations at home. Mother Teresa left home in 1928 at the age of 18 to join the Sisters of Loreto with the view of becoming a missionary in India. She never saw her mother or sister again. Saying yes to being a missionary and following Christ in those days is very different than today. What a cross that must have been. Mother Teresa was named a saint by Pope Francis 6 years ago today, and tomorrow, Monday, is her feast day. Of course, she was a saint by the life that she lived, loving God and loving neighbor. And we know that the church names a saint based on the saint's holy life and at least 2 scientifically unexplained miracles through that saint's intercession. Yes, the saints in heaven can hear our prayers, and you can read that in the book of Revelation, chapter 5, verse 8. In Mother Teresa's case, it was a woman in India who had a stomach tumor, and the stomach tumor went away through the intercession, through the prayers asked of Mother Teresa to present to God. And a man in Brazil who had a brain abscess and then woke up from a coma, and his recovery also was due to the prayers prayed in the name of Mother Teresa after her death in 1997. We see in Mother Teresa one who, in spite of everything, clung tightly to the cross in her life. We know from her writings that for many years in her life, as she got older, she never felt any consolation in her prayers. And consolation is that feeling or that movement in our hearts, in our soul, that assures us that God hears my prayer and is leading me in his way. It is that blessed assurance that Jesus is mine. Of course, as a young sister, she, like all beginners in prayer or in religious life, felt those deep stirrings of the heart and experienced great consolation in her prayer with God. But as she got older, she felt a dryness in her prayer, as if her beloved Lord was hiding from her. What did she do? She did not stop praying like many of us would do when we hit dryness in our spiritual life. She accepted that as a cross and kept loving God in her prayer and in doing his will by caring for the poorest of the poor. She never gave up, even when difficulties like that kind of a cross were in her life. As an aside about Mother Teresa, in the late 1970s, in New Jersey, my mother and father and my younger brother and my sisters met Mother Teresa in a convent in northern New Jersey, and they took photos together with her. And after getting back into the car to drive home, which was about an hour away from where our family lived, my father, when he was driving his Volkswagen van, when he got to the top of a hill, he would turn off the motor and just let the car coast down the hill. My mother became annoyed at him and asked, "Why are you doing that?" And my dad said, "The gas tank is on empty, and I just gave away my last $10 to Mother Teresa." Jesus invites us to follow him and to break any attachments that stand in our way of being his disciples, that we might freely embrace the cross in our lives and so follow him more deeply every day of our lives. And we can ask ourselves, are we attached to people or to possessions that stand in the way of us following Christ?